Sunday, April 24th, 2022 was a typical spring day for the quiet and cozy town of Chippewa Falls in Wisconsin. It was one of those places where everyone knows their neighbor, and children walk freely through the streets without fear of anything. The residents of the city appreciated peace and quiet, and families often spent time together with their loved ones. For little Iliana, Lily Peters, this day was no exception. The girl was active, inquisitive, and loved to communicate with relatives and friends. That day, Lily went to visit her aunt, whose house was only a few blocks from her own house. The evening began like many others. Lily spent time with her cousins, played and socialized in the company of her family. These visits were customary for the Peters family. Lily's life revolved around school, friends, and family, with whom she was always closely connected. Her family, like many others in Chippewa Falls, adhered to simple and cozy family traditions, where evenings together and the support of loved ones were the focus. Her aunt's house was a second home for Lily. She felt comfortable and safe here, so her parents never bothered sending her there. It was an everyday part of life for everyone. That day, Lily planned to return home in the evening, and when it was time to leave, she said goodbye to her relatives and headed towards her house. By that time, it was already getting dark, but the way home was short and familiar. Her route ran through several blocks, along the streets she had walked since childhood. There was no reason for the family to worry. They were sure that Lily would be back soon. However, time passed, and Lily did not appear. At first, the parents decided not to raise the alarm. Perhaps the girl stayed with friends or decided to spend a little more time outside. Her absence did not immediately cause concern, but as time continued to pass, Lily's parents began to feel increasing excitement. Usually the girl returned home exactly at the appointed time. It was her habit. She didn't make her parents worry and always kept her promises. As the clock began to approach 9 p.m., anxiety began to turn into real fear. Lily's parents started calling acquaintances, friends, and neighbors, hoping that one of them had seen the girl, but no one could tell where she was. The waiting became unbearable, and after a while the family decided to start searching on their own. They decided to follow the route that Lily usually took home, checking every nook and cranny, every possible path that the girl could turn into. Despite all their efforts, the search did not yield results. Lily was not on the main streets or in the familiar surroundings. By 9 p.m., the alarm reached its peak, and the family made the difficult decision to contact the police. Local law enforcement agencies immediately responded to the report of the missing child. In small towns like Chippewa Falls, any incidents involving children are taken extremely seriously. Soon, police cars began circulating around the city, and officers began interviewing passers-by and residents of the area. The search for Lily began immediately. Local residents, having learned about the incident, did not stay away. Friends, neighbors, classmates, and even bystanders joined the search activities. The urban community, accustomed to a quiet life, is now faced with a situation that has led to confusion and horror. As night fell, the atmosphere in the city changed. Anxiety gripped everyone who knew the Peters family and their little girl. The situation was becoming more and more tense. Several hours passed, but no trace of Lily could be found. The police were combing the areas around the aunt's house and the surrounding area, checking forest trails and wastelands, trying to find at least some clue. The girl's parents couldn't find a place for themselves, each time hoping for a miracle that their daughter was about to return home safe and sound. However, as the night turned into morning, it became clear that Lily was missing, and every minute of delay reduced the chances of her safe return. The morning of April 25th came cold and gloomy. The city woke up under an oppressive cloud of anxiety, and it soon became known that Lily had not returned home overnight. The announcement of her disappearance spread through all local news channels, and the police continued to search in an enhanced mode. With every passing hour, a feeling of fear and helplessness gripped everyone involved in the search. The morning of April 25th, 2022 began for residents of Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin, with a feeling of growing anxiety. The small town, which has always been famous for its calm atmosphere and strong neighborhood ties, found itself in the center of a real tragedy. Since the evening of April 24th, Iliana Lily Peters has been missing, and every minute of her absence has increased fear among residents. Volunteers and police did not stop searching all night, combing the surrounding area and woodlands, but there were no results. The fear gradually turned into horror, and as the night turned into morning, the hope for the safe return of the girl began to fade. By 9 a.m., when the search had been going on for more than 10 hours, the most terrible news arrived. Lily's body had been found. One of the local volunteers involved in the search came across the body of a girl who had lain all night in a secluded place on a narrow forest path. The path was not far from her aunt's house, where Lily came that day. The entire area was surrounded by dense thickets of forest, which made it difficult to access and barely noticeable to passers-by. This forest has always been considered a safe place for children and adults to walk. Its paths were known to local residents, and therefore, the message that a crime occurred here shocked everyone. The police immediately cordoned off the area as soon as the first investigators arrived at the scene. The area around was fenced off with tape so that no one could accidentally enter and disturb the evidence. Given the nature of the incident, the investigators immediately realized that every detail needed to be recorded with maximum accuracy. They searched every inch of the forest path, every bush and tree, looking for the slightest clues. When criminologists arrived at the scene, they began to collect and record every possible piece of evidence that could help in the investigation. The forest path was now surrounded by police and forensic officers in gloves and masks, carefully examining the crime scene. The place where Lily was found spoke for itself. She clearly hadn't planned on being here. The girl's body was lying on the ground, partially covered by bushes and fallen branches. Detectives immediately realized that the perpetrator may have tried to hide the body so that it would not be found immediately. Apparently, the killer acted quickly and in a hurry, afraid of being caught. Lily's death was violent. It became obvious from the first minutes of the examination. There were characteristic signs of a struggle on and around the girl's body. Crumpled grass, broken branches of bushes, and crushed earth indicated that the girl had tried to defend herself, or run away, before her death. The police noticed traces of dragging, which could indicate that the perpetrator moved her body after the attack. One of the most important clues found at the crime scene was found near the body. These were shoe marks left in the soft mud after the rain. These prints did not belong to Lily, which immediately became one of the first significant leads for detectives. The footprints indicated that the attacker may have been a teenager or an adult with a small leg. Criminologists recorded the prints and began to study their shape and size in detail. In addition to shoe marks, fragments of fabric that did not belong to Lily were found at the crime scene. These pieces of fabric could have come off during a struggle or when moving the body. All found materials were immediately sent for laboratory examination for analysis. The police hoped that the DNA that these fragments could preserve would help identify the perpetrator. Clothes left at the crime scene could also be a key piece of evidence. The place where Lily was found was only a few blocks from her aunt's house, but away from her usual route home. This circumstance immediately raised questions from the investigators. Lily was a smart and responsible girl, and her parents trusted her to come home on her own. The path she was following was known to many local children, and some of them often used it as a shortcut. However, the very fact that Lily was on this path in the evening made the police think that someone could have deliberately brought her there. Investigators have put forward several versions of how Lily could have ended up in this place. The main hypothesis was the assumption that she knew her killer. Investigators believed that she probably went down this path voluntarily, following someone she trusted. At this point, the police began to suspect that the perpetrator was from Lily's inner circle or her family. Criminologists continued to work at the crime scene, recording everything that could shed light on what happened. It was clear that the perpetrator knew the area and understood that this forest path was rarely visited in the evening. This suggested that the killer was either a local resident or had studied the area well. It was extremely important for the police to understand whether the perpetrator acted spontaneously, taking advantage of the situation, or whether it was a pre-planned crime. Police began interviewing anyone who might have known Lily or been in the vicinity on the day she disappeared. First of all, Lily's family members and her aunt, who had the girl that evening, were interviewed. According to her aunt, Lily spent her time as usual playing with her cousins. She left the house at the usual time to return home. None of the family members noticed anything suspicious. However, the aunt mentioned that Lily sometimes used this path to shorten the path, and this became an important detail for the investigators. In addition to the family, the police began to interview neighbors and possible witnesses. Residents of the area knew the girl well, and no one noticed anything suspicious that evening and did not report strangers in the area. But the police continued to look for witnesses who could help with the investigation, especially those who might have seen Lily on the path. Realizing that the case was related to a local resident, the detectives turned their attention to the surveillance cameras installed on the main streets. They checked all possible video recordings to find out if Lily was with someone that evening. However, the cameras did not capture anything suspicious. Detectives increasingly began to suspect that the perpetrator might have been familiar with the area and knew how to avoid crowded places and surveillance cameras. Soon, the police received an important tip. Several witnesses mentioned that they saw Lily in the company of a teenager on the day of her disappearance. This statement was a major breakthrough. According to one of the neighbors, he saw Lily walking down the street with someone who looked like a teenager. The witness assured that their communication seemed ordinary and did not arouse suspicion. They talked as if they knew each other well. But after this statement, the police focused their attention on Lily's inner circle. Of particular interest was a teenager who was the girl's cousin and often visited her aunt's house. Operatives began checking his alibi and asking about his behavior in the days before and after the disappearance of the girl. According to family members, the teenager behaved unremarkably, but his relationship with Lily has become more strained in recent months. Although he was not the center of attention at first, his behavior and contradictory explanations of his whereabouts on the evening of Lily's disappearance began to arouse suspicion. The police began to study this teenager more closely, soon discovering that he was in the area where Lily was last seen. An analysis of his phone and correspondence revealed disturbing details. On the evening of April 24th, his phone was turned off for several hours, and this coincided with the time interval when Lily disappeared. This circumstance reinforced suspicions. In addition, when examining the crime scene, the police found evidence that directly linked him to the incident. DNA traces were found on the clothes found next to Lily's body, which matched the DNA of the suspected teenager. This became decisive evidence, and the police immediately began to detain him, believing that they had finally found the one who was responsible for Lily's death. The arrest of a teenager with the initials CPB, suspected of the inhumane murder of Lily Peters, has become one of the most difficult operations for the local Chippewa Falls police. This small town, where everyone knew each other, was shocked by this terrible crime. The perpetrator turned out to be a minor, and the issue of detention had to be approached with the utmost caution. A special approach was required to avoid unnecessary traumatic moments for both the suspect and his family, and, of course, the society itself. The investigators were aware that any carelessness or excessive pressure during the arrest could cause a wave of protests or accusations of police brutality. At the same time, it was a terrible crime, and it was impossible to retreat from responsibility. The detention operation was planned carefully. Not only police officers were involved in the process, but also child care specialists, child psychologists, and social workers. It was important to take into account his age and mental state in order to avoid an escalation of the conflict that could lead to violence. When the police arrived at the suspect's house, they acted with restraint. They understood that any drastic action could lead to unpredictable consequences. They communicated with the teenager gently, trying not to cause aggression or panic in him. Despite the serious allegations, the first priority for the officers was to ensure a safe and calm detention process. The suspect was at home with his parents when police knocked on their door. This news came as a shock to the family. None of them could have imagined that their son could be involved in such a terrible crime. The parents couldn't believe their ears when police officers informed them that their son was suspected of murdering Lily Peters. At first, CPB denied all the charges. He claimed that he had nothing to do with Lily's disappearance and death, that he was at home that evening and did not leave the house. However, the police had already gathered enough evidence and presented him with irrefutable evidence. The testimony of witnesses who saw him with Lily that day, as well as evidence collected at the place where the body was found. The teenager began to realize that his lies would not be able to resist this load of evidence. When he was shown the results of the DNA examination, the suspect surrendered. It became clear to him that further denials were pointless. At that moment, he stopped defending himself and started talking about what really happened. The confession came as a shock not only to his family, but also to the detectives. The teenager said that he had considered the possibility of attacking Lily in advance. On that fateful evening, she was heading home from her aunt's when a teenager, knowing that the girl trusted him, took advantage of this trust and lured her into a forest area. According to the charges, CPB asked Lily to take a walk and explore the trail. Lily took her bike, and CPB took his hoverboard. As soon as they left the trail, he allegedly attacked the victim. Inappropriate actions on the part of CPB after the incident are also mentioned. It was found that CPB got scared and ran away. Then he returned to the scene and tried to hide the traces of what had happened. He did not immediately admit to the details. In the first moments of the interrogation, his testimony was confused and incomplete. He was clearly not ready to explain the motives for his actions, and perhaps he did not fully understand what made him commit such a cruel act. During the interrogations, which were conducted with the participation of child psychologists, the teenager began to talk about his experiences that had accumulated over the past months. He described how he felt lonely, alienated, and how the accumulated anger and discontent gradually turned into something darker. Investigators and psychologists were trying to figure out what could have pushed him to commit this crime. One of the versions was that the teenager suffered from psychological problems that were left without proper attention from adults. His parents did not notice any signs that something was wrong with their son, and friends and acquaintances, although they noted his isolation, did not attach much importance to this. However, as it became clear from the stories, his inner world as a teenager was full of pain and anger, which eventually led to this tragedy. Despite the fact that the cousin confessed to what he had done, his explanations remained incomplete. He could not explain exactly what was the last straw that pushed him to violence. One of the factors could be the emotional instability of a teenager who may have felt disconnected from the world around him and found no other way to express his feelings except through violence. Psychologists have suggested that the teenager could experience serious, emotional disorders that developed against the background of family problems or personal conflicts. The situation in the family also left much to be desired. His father was in prison for 3 years for possession of dubious videos. This could be the result of a lack of attention to his mental state. The teenager did not receive proper support, and his inner feelings, not finding a way out, led to tragedy. Since the teenager was a minor, his interrogation and subsequent legal actions were conducted with caution and in strict accordance with the law. Despite the confession, he was granted the right to a defense, and his interests were represented by lawyers specializing in juvenile cases. The trial for the murder of Lily Peters has become one of the most high-profile and difficult in the history of Chippewa Falls. The society was shocked by the brutality of the crime, especially considering that it was committed by a teenager who was part of Lily's family. The town, where such incidents were rare, faced a tragedy that became the subject of discussion not only among local residents, but also at the national level. From the very beginning of the trial, it was clear that the court had to resolve several difficult issues. First of all, it was necessary to determine how a teenager should be judged, as a minor or as an adult. Prosecutors insisted that despite his age, the brutality of the crime and its premeditated nature required serious punishment. They claimed that the teenager was aware of his actions and acted with full understanding of their consequences. This, according to prosecutors, made his responsibility comparable to that of an adult. At the same time, defense lawyers insisted that the accused needed psychiatric help and not punishment to the fullest extent of the law. They presented evidence that he suffered from mental disorders that were not diagnosed in time, which could have affected his behavior and led to the tragedy. Psychiatrists invited to the trial testified that the defendant was in a state of deep emotional crisis, which could be caused by both personal and family problems. They also claimed that he could not fully control his actions due to his mental state. The court hearings continued for several weeks. Each meeting was attended by members of Lily's family who listened with pain and horror to all the details of what happened. Lily's father made an emotional speech in which he expressed his grief and disappointment that the man they knew and considered part of the family was guilty of murdering their daughter. His words deeply touched everyone present, including the jury, and became a symbol of the pain that the Peters family experienced. In January 2024, it was decided that CPB would be sued as an adult. In February 2024, prosecutors announced that they intended to set a date for the last trial in April 2025. Bail for him was set at $1 million. If convicted, he faces life in prison. And while the teenager is serving a prison sentence, his fate has become the subject of public debate about juvenile justice. The murder of Lily Peters came as a shock to the entire city of Chippewa Falls, a small and friendly community where such crimes seemed impossible. Residents have always considered their city a safe place to live, where they can trust their neighbors and quietly let their children go for a walk alone. However, the brutal reality of the crime destroyed this sense of security, and the city faced a horror that could not have been predicted. Local authorities and law enforcement agencies have also come under pressure. Many parents have begun to rethink their approaches to child safety, wondering if they are well protected enough. Families who were used to trusting relationships with neighbors were now wary even of those they had known for years. Lily's tragedy shattered the tranquility in a city where everyone knew each other and called into question the idea that safety can be taken for granted. The public discussion went beyond Chippewa Falls and attracted attention at the state level and even across the country. Issues of juvenile protection, adolescent mental health, and violence prevention have become topics of discussion at both local and national levels. Many experts and activists have begun to talk about the need for more active monitoring of the mental state of children and adolescents, especially in families where internal conflicts or emotional difficulties may arise. Local authorities and schools in Chippewa Falls responded to the tragedy by implementing programs aimed at supporting adolescents and their mental health. Meetings with psychologists, social workers, and crisis specialists were organized in schools. The purpose of these meetings was not only to identify possible problems among adolescents, but also to teach parents and teachers how to recognize early signs of emotional instability in children. These initiatives were aimed at preventing similar tragedies in the future and at ensuring that every child can receive the necessary help if they encounter difficulties. Local public organizations have also begun to hold actions and events aimed at raising awareness about the problems of adolescence and violence. There are more initiatives in the city to create safe zones for children, as well as programs aimed at improving communication between adults and children in order to identify and prevent potential threats in time. The tragedy surrounding the murder of Lily Peters has shocked not only her family, but the entire city of Chippewa Falls. A small town known for its safety and strong neighborhood ties was suddenly confronted with a terrible crime that destroyed the sense of security among its residents. Lily was an ordinary girl who lived in a caring family and was surrounded by friends and relatives. The fact that her life was cut short at such an early age and under such cruel circumstances left a deep mark on the hearts of all who knew her. The investigation of this case demonstrated the professionalism of the police and criminologists who worked tirelessly, collecting evidence and finding answers to the questions that tormented everyone. A quick response to a missing persons report, a thorough examination of the crime scene, and conducting interrogations allowed us to trace the suspect. However, despite the success of the investigation, the very fact that the perpetrator turned out to be a teenager close to his family raised even more questions and public concern. This tragedy has become a wake-up call about how important it is to pay attention to the psychological state of adolescents and respond in time to signs of their emotional instability. Failure to notice and resolve internal conflicts in time can lead to catastrophic consequences. The story of Lily Peters reminded us that even in the most seemingly safe communities, there are dangers that no one wants to think about. This case has become a lesson for everyone. It is important not only to monitor the physical safety of children, but also to maintain